Hey you, welcome back. Joe here, and today we'll be making a fitted dress. However, today I want to do things a little differently and kind of show you guys the process that goes into making our patterns. From draping to samples and our final patterns and all that good stuff, I kind of want to show you guys and share it with you. So let's get started and jump in. To get started, I like to rip off a rectangular piece for the center front and another for the center back. Once I do that, I fold it at 1/2 inch or a full centimeter depending on my mood, and then pin it directly on the center front or the center back seam line. It may not be visible on video, but it's definitely there on my dress form. Once I do that, I like to pin it as straight as possible along the line, one pin at the neck, one under the bust, and then one at the bottom to secure the fabric. Once I do that, I like to smooth over the fabric to the side as much as possible, and whatever excess is left over is what becomes your dart. Now it may be tricky to do it at first, since sometimes you kind of smooth it over the wrong way and then it kind of creates a shift or something like that, or like me, your pens run out of ink, so you have to switch them out midway. If you mess up as well, you could also go over it with a different colored pen, which is what I do a lot of the time. Now for my darts, to mark them, I mark the point, the apex, and then the two legs, which are the two sides that create that little rectangular shape. Now it's a little similar for the fisheye darts, but it's just a little more work. It's basically two darts put together at the ends. So you mark the top, the middle, and then the bottom. And once you do that, trace out the legs and you will see it ends up being about like a shape of a diamond. And obviously, after all of that work, we deserve a little cup of coffee. Emphasis on little, because that was not a little cup. And trust me, I hear that from my family all the time. I don't need to hear it from y'all. Now, we basically have to repeat the process for the back once again, but in my opinion, it's a little easier since there isn't as much dimension at the back as there is in the front. But do not be fooled, since the magic of matching patterns is here to ruin the day and make you have a headache. No, I'm kidding, it's really not that difficult, but it does present its challenges here and there where you have to match your pattern pieces to each other and do all of that good stuff. It's all math, and math is not really my forte. I prefer to do the creative stuff and do it by hand, manually. So 3 cups of coffee, a headache, and 2 aspirins later, here we are. No, I'm totally playing. So after making my first set of pattern pieces from the draping, I went ahead and traced the material and sewed my first sample. As you can see, the sample is way too big on Mima, so we're gonna have to go ahead and take note of all the X's throughout each side. Then we'll just take a note of it, mark it down, and take it away from our original pattern, and in the process creating a new one. So now that we made sample number 2, let's try it on, and as you can see, it fits way better already. But we still have some small little tweaks to add here and there, like the darts being too small, we need to take them in a little more, and that neckline. Once we do that, as you can see, it already looks amazing and way more improved. Love it. To not be wasteful, I ended up just taking out the darts for my second sample and adding them there all over again. So after testing the patterns and samples and all of that good stuff, it's time to sew. Now for today's fabric choice, we'll be using charmeuse. Charmeuse is a lightweight fabric woven with a satin weave and can be identified from other silky materials by looking at its textured, lustrous side compared to its wrong side that is very dull. Today I'll be sewing 2 different dresses, one lavender and one pink, and both will be cut and sewn on the bias. Now if you're wondering what the bias is, do not worry, I'm prepared and I have a little segment to teach you how to find it. Now, cutting on the bias is simply tracing your pattern pieces onto your fabric at a 45-degree angle in order to add some ease onto woven materials that normally don't have any. This also really helps the fabric mold to the body and drape nicely. Now, one of the easiest ways to find the bias is to start off by finding your selvages. Your selvages, you will have 2 on each end of your roll of fabric or your piece of fabric, and the selvages are usually the edge of the material that have some little furry ends or are kind of look like they've been hemmed. So now that we know what the selvage is, let's go ahead and move on to grain lines. I will be using my stands to mark them and help us have a visual. So for the first stand, it will be called the warp. Now the warp threads are usually parallel to the selvage, always, and are the first threads to be woven onto a loom and the strongest to help hold everything together. The next one that intercepts the warp is called the weft. It always goes from left to right. It's also called the cross grain. Once you find these 2, it's very easy to find the bias at a 45-degree angle, and there it is. So I'm gonna go ahead and tug on both the warp and the weft threads and show you how there's little to no stretch or any give when you do that. But when you stretch the bias, there is significant amount of stretch and ease. And that's basically the use of the bias. When sewing silky materials or lightweight fabrics, it really helps it fall down and drape nicely onto the body. Since cutting materials on the bias does use up more materials, I do like to trace and cut all of my pieces as closely together as possible in order to minimize that. Also, before you cut, I do recommend you trace out all of the legs of your darts in order to help you out in the future when you're sewing. The darts will be the first part we sew on the dress, especially the fisheye ones, since they are a little more complicated and take up more of my time. So I like to start off at the edge of the dart, the apex point, and then kind of shift the fabric until they're perfectly aligned, and then I run a pin through that entire leg of the dart until it reaches the point, and I make sure that I pin them in a way that makes it easier to remove the pin while I'm sewing. When sewing the fisheye darts, I like to start off at the apex of the dart, which is that point at the top, and then work my way to the middle. Once I get to the middle, I pivot and then sew the rest of the dart, pulling the needle as I stitch through, and you're all set. So once you're done with your darts, let's go ahead and give everything a good press. That way it can start taking its form and help everything lay flat. And if you're wondering what I'm using as a little ironing ham, it is a sock from Daiso that did not fit me, and I thought it was so fluffy and it would work perfectly as an ironing ham. So there you go. Go ahead and get your own ironing ham from Daiso. So once the darts are all set, let's go ahead and place the fabrics with the right sides facing together and stitch down those side seams. I like to sew at 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 centimeter. So once we sew the side seams, it'll look something like this. And for those of you who are going to serge, let's go ahead and take a moment to do that before we move on to the next step. So for this video, I really wanted to show you guys 2 ways to line and add closures to your dress. So for the lavender one, I will be using a facing. So once you cut your facing, I recommend you find a way to hem it or make it look nice at the edge. You could either serge it or burn off the ends to make them melt into each other to prevent fraying. Once your facing is nice and secure, let's go ahead and face it right sides together against your dress and pin it together before we move on to sewing. Once again, sewing at 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 centimeter, sew across the entire neckline. Since the lining is rounded, we're going to go ahead and have to add a few slits into the rounded parts of the seam allowance on the neckline in order to make it fall nicely when we flip it over. So as I'm folding over the facing to the other side, I do like to keep a few clips here and there to hold it in place so that when I take it to my board, I don't have to shift around too much and just press it directly. So once you're done with your facing, it's time to move on to the closure, and I will be installing an invisible zipper on this dress, but I will be hemming before I install it. You can do it before or after, it's totally up to you. I just find it easier for me to do it before. Okay, I know zippers can be intimidating, but trust me, they intimidate me too, and I work through them super easily, and you will too. So to find the correct way to sew the zipper, I like to fold over the fabric the way it would look once it's already sewn, and then I use that as a guide to flip it over and then find its correct position. And before you go to sew, make sure you have the correct zipper foot installed. When sewing an invisible zipper, it's very essential to sew as closely as possible to that little coil as you can, and in doing so is what helps you ensure that it becomes invisible. For sewing zippers, I have a zipper foot set of 2 that comes from 1 for each side. However, there are some zipper feet that are double-sided and let you sew both sides with just 1. So once I sew one side, I do have to switch it out and put in the other, but not before I have to do an emergency alteration for my mother. Yes, a Christmas pillow. And this is the process of me removing it. All I have to do is unscrew that little screw, place the new one, and screw it back in. It's not a hassle, not a lot of work, so I really don't mind. For the other side, all we really have to do is repeat the process, fold the fabric over, figure out the positioning, and sew. So upon finishing, I realized that one side of my hem is a little longer than the other side, so I'm gonna go ahead and unstitch that, lower it a bit, and top stitch it again, and blend it into the old stitchings. Oof, doesn't it look way better already? But we still have the protruding zipper coming out of the end, so to safely remove it, let's go ahead and add a few stitches directly onto the coil to create a new stopper out of thread. Now only do this if you have a plastic coil, don't do this to metal coils or you will break your needle. But once you have the thread stopper in there, go ahead and trim any excess and you're all set. And before we try it on, let's go ahead and give everything a quick little press to make sure everything looks great. So at this point, I'm realizing that I probably used a faulty zipper, but luckily I'm more stubborn than it actually was itself, so I found a way to manage to get it to zip up. I did get some help at some point, but the help didn't help, so it's fine. It ended up working at some point, and look how snatched it is. It's so fitted, and I think that's why I was having trouble like zipping it up, but who knows. It zips up normally when it's on its own, it's not on a body, so I have no idea what's going on there. But I'm stubborn and I'm a little lazy, so I don't want to go back and reinstall a whole zipper, so I made it work. And it's time for the pink dress. Now for the pink dress, we're going to do everything the same up until we reach the point where we do the lining and the closure. So I really want to take this opportunity to kind of show you guys and review all the steps before that. That way when you go and sew your own dress, it's a lot easier to remember and you know kind of a better idea of what you need to do. So jumping in, let's go ahead and work on our fisheye darts first. Let's go ahead and pin all those legs together as evenly as possible. And when you go to sew, go ahead and start at the apex, work your way to the middle, pivot, and sew the rest as you pull your needle out. And bam, you repeat, start at the apex, pivot at the middle, and pull your pin as you sew. Then we sew the other side darts. And then you repeat the process for the back. For mine, I did kind of mess up one of the darts, but it's totally fine. You don't have to take out the entire dart if you mess up only one half of it. Take out the half and then just stitch over it as evenly as you can, and you're all set. Then we give everything a great press, you already know. Keep everything nice and crisp, help it hold its form, and helps us sew. Then we place the right sides together and sew the dress's side seams. Once again at 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 centimeter. Alright, and it's time for the lining. Now for the lining, as you can see, I'm making it way shorter than the actual dress, but you could make it as long as you want or even shorter. As for fabric choice, I'm using this kind of organza lightweight fabric, and I recommend you do the same in order to reduce bulk, but it's again up to you. One minor difference I'm doing to the darts is stitching over the dart line once I'm done sewing each dart. Besides that, nothing really changes, and that stitch line is only just to kind of just like strengthen it and add some kind of like flair to it. So nothing too serious, nothing too crazy, and can be done easily. So another optional change you can do is using French seams to kind of sew the side seams together. I think it looks really pretty with see-through fabric, so I do recommend you do that. Once I did that, I went ahead and trimmed off any excess off the hem of the lining and went ahead and folded it over and hemmed it. I did struggle a little bit at some point, but honestly, like, it's not very visible, and if you mess up a little bit, you're fine. Like, it's a lining, no one's gonna see it but you. Knowing me, I'd probably still want it to be perfect because I'm just a weirdo like that, but honestly, like, no one's gonna beat you up over it. Like, you're fine. Have fun with it. Once you're done sewing your lining piece, let's go ahead and line them up with the right sides facing together and pin along the whole neckline and the side seams. Unlike the facing, we're going to end up sewing into the side seams for this lining, and we're going to sew up until where the lining ends. So since the pink charmeuse is a lot more stretchier than the lavender fabric, I did kind of take into consideration the direction in which I'm sewing. So for the neckline, I did decide to start at the middle and work my way out for both sides. Since the neckline is one of the main focal points of a dress, I just really wanted to do it right and make sure it looked fine. Once you stitch the neckline, go ahead and sew the side seams all the way up until where the lining ends. Now, before you flip it over and iron it, I want to remind you to go ahead and snip into the curviest parts of the neckline, and I also want to remind you to snip the corners off of the seam allowance. That way when you turn it over, you get some really sharp corners and really nice curves. So once you're all done, it's going to look something like this on the wrong side. I took a moment to actually serge my side seams, and once you flip it over, it'll look amazing. Now, since this dress won't have a zipper, we're going to go ahead and seal the side seams starting from where the lining ends and sew our way down. Alright, so folding it over, I actually sewed it kind of wrong, I believe. I sewed my way up instead of sewing my way down. Not the end of the world, but it may affect it a little bit in the way it falls. But that aside, once we sew the side seams, let's go ahead and finish hemming the dress. So once we're done sewing, let's go ahead and give everything a good press to make sure it looks good and crisp. For the pink dress, I really want to do like a corset-like back closure. So once we're done ironing, let's go ahead and mark where our grommets are going to go. I have this little ruler that actually has these little dots that lets me space everything out perfectly. But if you don't have that, I kind of space it apart about like half a centimeter or a quarter of an inch. So while doing this, I kind of forgot two important things. The first one is that this fabric is already kind of stretchier than what I expected. The second important thing I forgot was the fact that when you're using closures, kind of like using grommets or anything like a corset, you kind of need it to be on the smaller side. That way it builds tension when you're pulling and it gives you a really nice lace up look at the back. As you can see on my dress, it's very bunched up and it doesn't look amazing. I even lied to myself by adding a hook and eye thinking it would make it look better, but it didn't. It just didn't. And while the fit looks amazing, I do love that. The back still kind of bothered me, but I was lying to myself and telling me it was fine. But really, it wasn't. However, I will be showing you how to fix it. So at this point, I really felt like the dress needed like a little wow factor or something to keep it a little more interesting. So I decided to draft a sleeve for us to go with it. All you have to do is cut out a rectangular piece with the length that is the same measurement as your smart doll's arm or a little bit shorter. Now the width is totally up to you, but the wider it is, the more gathers the sleeve will hold. Since we all know one of the biggest rules of doll sewing is to prevent bulk as much as possible, I kind of decided to hem this sleeve a little differently than we normally do. And I really want to give you a heads up that this technique mostly works on synthetic materials, and if you don't have that, it probably won't work and it'll end up burning your fabric. So do test it out on a scrap material just to double check and make sure that it will work. So to effectively hem lightweight synthetic materials, all you need to do is hold it parallel to a flame, and in doing so, it causes all the loose little synthetic fibers to kind of melt into each other to further prevent any fraying. And I ended up doing this to any side that had a raw edge. And if you're wondering why I didn't do this for the dress, I just felt like it was too risky and did not want to risk all of that work. So once you secure those raw edges, it's time to start sewing. Fold over your piece lengthwise and sew all the way down. Once you're done, you're going to end up with a tube-like piece and it's looking amazing already. Fold it back and mark about a centimeter or half an inch from the hem on both ends. And this will become our casing. Fold it into itself and reveal the line and make sure it's about a quarter of an inch or the measurement of your elastic and then stitch. When sewing this, I do recommend you start on one side of the previous seam you just sewed and then end at the other, but never overlap, because when you do, you will end up closing this casing, and that's what we needed to be, a casing. So we need an opening in order to be able to thread our elastic or ribbon through. So very quickly, let's review with the pink fabric. Fold it into itself, revealing about enough space past the line to fit your elastic. So make sure that anything past that line is big enough for your elastic or ribbon to fit. And remember not to sew over the seam allowance. Start on one side of the seam and you will end up on the other side of your seam allowance, and therefore creating that casing we need. So here we have ribbon and elastic, and I will be showing you how to thread both. Let's start off with elastic since it's the most complicated one. For the elastic, I personally eyeballed it and kind of measured it against the arm, so I recommend you do that. And then the second piece, I did make sure to make it a little longer since the forearm is a little bigger. Now to thread this, I have this little tool from Daiso that I got for like $1.50 and I highly recommend. And I use that to kind of thread through. Now for the elastic, I do make sure to pin the end to the sleeve to make sure it's anchored in and doesn't get pulled through when I'm running all the gathers through. And then once it pulls out on the other end, I grab both ends, pin them together, and move on to the sewing machine. Once at the sewing machine, all you really need to do is stitch over the overlapped elastic ends and secure them, then simply pull them back into the casing and you're all set. You don't really need to close the casing since it's so small it won't even be noticeable, and with the tension from the elastic or the ribbon, it'll be practically invisible. Now for the ribbon, it's basically the same threading process. However, I will say that it's a lot tougher to keep the ribbon one on. Somehow the tension from the ribbon just doesn't stay on the same as the elastic one. So do keep that in mind when you're doing this, but I will say it's a lot easier to make the ribbon one. However, it takes way longer to put on. While the elastic one is reversed, it takes a while to make, but it will forever be super easy to slide on and slide off. So at this point, I'm just having a lot of fun, just kind of playing around with the sleeves and seeing how many different styles I could make with just this one sample. And while doing so, I kind of realized one thing. And then I took out my other sleeve just to kind of confirm it with the elastic one, and I did confirm it. So what's going on here, I realized that the casing, which is on the wrong side, holds a lot of gathers, and if I was to flip it and do it on the right sides, it would definitely show a lot more. So that's just what I did. And bam, it looks just like this. This is actually what I envisioned when I was thinking of making the sleeve, but I just didn't think that the casing would look great on the outside. And look at it, it just really defines those gathers and makes them look amazing. So you could do this either way. You could do the casing on the right side or the wrong side. It's totally up to you. And either way, it'll look amazing. I even did it on a pink sleeve. I ended up removing the ribbon and the casing and doing the casing on the right side and then adding elastic to the pink sleeve. And I'm in love with it, and I think it looks 10 times better. If you did end up liking how the casing looks on the right sides as it is on the pink sleeve, I just want to give you a quick reminder that you should probably use elastic since the openings are on the inside of the sleeve, and if you were to use ribbon, they'll be kind of just protruding out from the inside. It won't look amazing to me in my opinion, but if you like it, go for it. So upon finishing the whole sewing process, I really felt like I wanted to add a little more of a wow factor. Y'all already know me. So I brought out my little hotfix stone setter thingy. I hadn't used it in a while, so I did feel like I was neglecting it, so it's long overdue. So I have two different ideas in mind for the dresses, like in the way I'm going to set the stones. I don't want them to be identical, but I do want them to be cohesive. So that's the vibe I was going for. Starting off with the lavender dress. So for the lavender dress, I really wanted to set the stones in a way that made it seem like there was a corset going on in there, or even a sort of boning in the seams or all of that good stuff that corsets and formal dresses with structure normally have. So I basically had to set stones wherever seam lines were, and I had to be strategic with it, even though at first I really wasn't and I was just kind of eyeballing it. In the end, I ended up adding one extra on one side, so I ended up having to blend it and it kind of shifted the whole thing, but it's not even really noticeable. If you still don't get what I'm talking about, no worries, I'm also a visual learner. Let me show you. So I'm basically trying to set stones wherever you see the little lines on the bodice of these dresses. And by this point, I am still not sure how I'm going to finish up the lavender dress, so I quickly shift over to the pink one. Now for the pink one, I really want to keep it simple. I don't want to do the whole corset vibe again. So I mostly just wanted to decorate the neckline and make sure I kept it simple and cute just to keep the elegant vibe and not really make it look too busy. I really wanted the stones to kind of do most of the work for me, especially since I was already using some iridescent stones with a really nice rose gold like shine to them on certain angles. So I really wanted that to do most of the work for me and just kind of take it home and carry it and do all of that. So when you do that, you don't really want to make it look too busy or add a really intricate design because it'll just look like too much. After putting in all that work, putting all those gems onto the pink dress, I finally came to the realization and admitted to myself that I wanted to take in the backside. So I did just that. All I did was sew off a little wedge, take it out, remove the grommets before that. That was the previous clip you just saw. And I actually ended up keeping that piece in there. It was just part of a seam allowance and it worked perfectly great as of like a support or a backing for the new grommets. So once again, I want to give you another quick reminder that if you want to use grommets on the back of the dress as a closure, do remove a wedge, especially if you have the medium smooth bust, because Azula is actually wearing the push-up medium bust, so it's bigger than the default bust the Smart Dolls do come with. So even then, I still needed to remove a good amount. So That says a lot, so do that. That way it looks amazing like that. Leaving that little wedge in there as like a seam allowance will definitely help you support the grommets when you're installing them, and will definitely secure them a lot more than if you had like just 2 layers of fabric. So after everything the pink dress put me through, it was time to move on back to the lavender one. For the lavender one, I kind of finally made up my mind on how I wanted to finish it up. I ended up doubling down on the whole corset vibe and just doing that whole straight line down the waistline and kind of dividing it, creating the center of focus there. And after doing so, I remembered that I left a few raw edges on my zipper, so I went back and kind of melted the ends to kind of secure them and prevent any frayage. So once I finished adding all the stones to both dresses, this is kind of how they ended up looking. The pink dress just has the neckline bedazzled and nothing else. Just wanted to keep it simple like I said before, while the lavender one does have the whole corset vibe going on, and I added some along the whole neckline as well. Now that they're all jeweled up, let's move on to the sleeves. For the sleeves, I did want to continue with the same theme of cohesiveness. So for the pink one, I chose to go for more of a diamond tufted type of vibe, where you kind of like shape out diamonds and put a stone wherever the diamond's point would be, and just carry on that pattern throughout the whole sleeve. In hindsight, I probably should have added the stones before I sewed it, but I wasn't sure of the patterns I was doing on the dresses at all, so I didn't just want to go and make up something without planning ahead of time. So upon completion, the sleeve started to look a little more like this, and it was everything I hoped for, so let's move on to the lavender one. Since I'm planning on using the lavender sleeve as a reversible sleeve, I really wanted to add the stones somewhere they would be seen on both sides, so I decided to add them only on the hem of the sleeves on both ends. That way, no matter what side I'm using the sleeves on, those stones will still pop through and show. Alrighty, well let's go ahead and try everything on. Starting off with the pink sleeve. Whole bunch of little crystals on there, looking amazing and very regal, may I say. And then moving on to the lavender one. Very cute, simple, but just as impactful. I'm very curious, which one do you guys prefer? Sound off in the comments and let me know. Alrighty, well with our sleeves on, let's go ahead and try to put on our dresses, and emphasis on try since the zipper was once again super extremely stubborn. Oh yeah, and not only did it want to refuse to zip up, it also decided that it wanted to knock off a few little crystals off of the dress in the process. Oh, and let me tell you guys, I absolutely tried everything from getting help, from clipping the ends, pulling, and it finally inched a little bit up, and after doing that, I was so happy that I didn't want to lose that little quarter of an inch that it went up. So I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go ahead and set these stones directly on this body since it's never coming off, since this dress is hateful and hates me for whatever reason. So I went ahead and did that. Luckily, I was very light with the Heat Fix little gem applier that nothing happened to my doll, and by that point I surrendered to the dang zipper and decided to remove the dress once again for the last time to reapply all of those gems and make sure that they are stuck and glued on there. And if you're wondering about Mima and if she's okay, she is perfectly fine. Nothing happened to her. Zero harm came to her from the making of this dress. And in my frustration with this dang zipper, I posted an Instagram post and let you guys know what was going on, and someone suggested I used beeswax to actually rub along the coils to help it slide over a lot easier, and somehow I think it ended up helping, and because it just closed up way quicker than the first few times. So thank you to that person, you're amazing. From there, I moved on to the pink dress and started lacing it up on Azula, who will be rocking it and looks stunning on her. I can't wait to show you guys the full end result. And if you're wondering how I'm lacing up the back, I'm sorry if I disappoint, but I'm doing it just like I do my shoes. There's honestly so many different creative and beautiful ways to lace up corsets, so I do recommend you look that up and try a few different styles. And if you're struggling with the lining like myself, having it peek through the neckline, I recommend you kind of lift up the skirt and go into the lining and just tug on it a little bit, and it'll slowly kind of just pull it out of the way. And here's another peek at Azula wearing the dress and putting on her pink sleeve. Thank you guys so much for watching today. I really appreciate it. And if you found any value in today's video, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment below what your favorite part of today's video was. If you're still in the mood to sew, go ahead and click some of the video links displayed on the screen right now and check out some of my previous works. Thank you so much. See you next time.